Hello there, Thando Book Club lovers. We are so happy to have you join us as we talk to African female authors about their books and the stories behind them. As is our custom, we always begin every episode with a quote from a famous African that we believe captures the spirit and message of the author we'll be interviewing. Today's quote is from Chinua Achebe, and he says, "I believe in the complexity of the human story, and that there's no way you can tell that story in one way and say, this is it. Always, there will be someone who can tell it differently depending on where they are standing. This is the way I think the world's stories should be told, from many different perspectives." This quote sums up what our guest today embodies with respect to her work and how it has pushed the envelope in African storytelling. Virginia Phiri was born in 1954 in Zimbabwe's second largest city, Bulawayo. She is the author of Grey Angels, published in 2019, Highway Queen in 2010, Destiny 2006, and Desperate in 2002. Having been raised in a family of political activists aligned to the Zimbabwe African People's Union, she was actively involved in the Zimbabwe Liberation War at the age of 17. Later, in 2000, together with Zimbabwe women writers, she contributed to an anthology, Women of Resilience, the Voices of Women Ex-Combatants. In 1972, she left the country for neighboring Botswana on the way to Zambia. Phiri is married to Werner Feibeck. Their only child, a daughter named Tekla, died in 2001. Apart from being an author, Phiri is an accountant by profession as well as an African orchid expert. Virginia, welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm really honored to be here. I really feel good. Thank you.
Well, we're so glad to have you. And as I often say, in terms of our journey here at the book club, you've been instrumental. We've had one of our best seasons online due to a lot of the curating and connecting to your network that you've done for us. So we're really beyond excited to have you with us on today's show. So let's get started. Your writing has been described as risque, honest to a fault, but also it has really captivated the imagination of academics all over. How do you keep it going? How did you even start writing? Was this how you thought it would end up?
Not at all. I actually didn't even realize I'll come this far. But also, I will say this comes from when I was a little girl. I was always very curious, mischievous, not in a destructive way, but I wanted to know, I wanted to see, I wanted to do things, I wanted to scribble this, I wanted to do that, I wanted to read this. Even though we didn't have books for children, I ended up reading those big books for big people, and I ended up tumbling into the books I was not supposed to read. But I read, and I carried on, and I forgot all about it. As an adult, well, I didn't even think about it. All I knew when before I left the country, I was a rock star. And I played music with my band, High Chord, and everybody else. People just went crazy. And that's where we actually broke the apartheid, the other youngsters, teenagers of all diversity, the whites, the Indians, and at that time they used the word coloreds. They came to the township where we played. So really, I would have been a musician to be an author afterwards, even when I was an accountant. But when this scribbling came up and we started with Zimbabwe, I'm not quite sure. I didn't realize I'll come this far. It was just something to do on the sideline as I did my accounting. As an accountant for a professional firm of accountants, balance sheet, tax and company law, farming community industry, and all in the evenings I wrote. Up to now, I only write at night because that's what I'm used to.
Wow, that's very diligent of you, because I can't think of anything more time consuming than balancing books in Zimbabwe as a day job. As a founder of the Zimbabwe Women's Writers, which you founded in 1990, and Zimbabwe Academic and Non-Fiction Authors Association, among several other cultural organizations, Zimbabwe German Society being one of them, how have you managed now to balance nurturing culture and particularly writers with your own drive and desire to write? How do you give equal or a balanced space and attention to both?
Well, when the necessity rises, something comes up, somebody approaches me, I find there's need. It's my responsibility. I have to get out there and do it, even if I'm not asked. It's not about money. I know everybody wants money, but money will come in its time when it wants to appear. But you have to do what you have to do, and what you have and what you know you have to share. Of course, people say, yes, consultants, yes, we do understand. I always argue with my friends abroad when they say, yes, this and that. And I say, yes, we can do consultancy here, but in Africa we share information. Most people cannot afford that consultancy. And how much would I charge them? They don't have the money. So we share the information. Those who get it will get away with it. They will do the arts, they will write, they'll do the accounts, they'll do the English or learn or other languages. And also, I speak a lot of languages too, by the way, quite a bit. In fact, if I add them all, including three European languages, which is English, French, and German, the rest are African, I end up maybe with 15 languages. I'm not bragging, but that's how it works. You learn a language, it's your passport to getting into communities, to dealing with people. Even when you travel, language is your passport to the world.
Excellent,
Yeah,
amazing.
Absolutely.
And definitely, and you have also used that multilingual background in your writing, because I understand that you've published in both Shona and Ndebele.
Absolutely.
What was that like for you?
Well, I was a bit challenged on the Shona part. I had to get a lot of help, especially from Chietza and Sengezi. But with Ndebele, I'm home and dry. So that's what I grew up. That's where I was born. That's what I know. That's what I'm very fluent in. So I have no problems. Right now, since the COVID came, 2020, I've written 27, well, I've recorded 15 stories of children's stories to go to schools because I couldn't go to tell stories anymore. That is in 10 stories in English, 5 in isiNdebele. And right now, we just finished another section where to write one-page story, which I challenge my colleagues with an illustration. Just done how many? 8 altogether, which is now 4 English and 4 Ndebele.
Wow.
So they've gone to schools already. We've actually distributed before they close the schools, and the second set will be coming. So I packed my novel in 2020, which is called Robbed of Dignity. That's the one which comes after
Grey Angels.
Grey Angels. I packed it for these 2 years. I've only gone back to it because I'm through with the children. And it's all going for free. And thanks to IBBY, the International Board for Young People's Literature, who actually accessed us just a little money, not much, just a bit, to do the CDs and to do the one-page stories and distribute for free.
Awesome.
So
excellent.
I've done my part.
Yes.
Oh, we've done a part with my colleagues that I come in.
Indeed, you really, really have. I mean, that is an amazing body of work, an amazing touch points, and many different languages, from numbers to cultural languages. We've been talking to Virginia Phiri, but we'll be taking a short break, and we'll be back in a few minutes to discuss more of her work and some of her well-known stories that we all know and love. Stay tuned for more. Thank you for joining us on the Thando Book Club. Today, we're talking to Virginia Phiri and discussing her amazing body of work. Virginia, now let's get into some of the books that you're well known for and that have really made waves. And I'd like to start with the book Desperate, published in 2002. This was quite controversial, one of your first big projects. And the book is a collection of stories describing the circumstances that drive women into commercial sex work. What inspired the book?
Well, during the struggle, the women who were unfortunately called prostitutes. And as we went along, it's actually the sex workers. These women also played a role in the struggle. And people don't appreciate that. Or they don't want to know. They shielded people. They hid people. They actually had to hide them, conceal them, as if, just... I happened to be at one time in a situation where I had to be hidden. And these women looked after me, fed me, protected me. They went to do their work because they had to work, especially in the surroundings of drinking areas and all. And that's where they also stayed, by the way. And so I stayed there. Well, I had to volunteer. I'd cook for them and do this and they told stories, very sad stories. And in the end, you realize that somewhere young women, somewhere elderly women, even though they were old, but they still had to work because their communities had rejected them for various reasons. Some, they were supposed to be called witches. Some could not have children. Or some were just, chased away for whatever reasons. You know how it is. So I listened to all that. And then later on, more than 20 years, I kept on thinking. And then I saw the scene where I was in Bulawayo, in Harare. I saw those women. It's not a luxury. It's actually a need. In fact, it's not for themselves. It's for their children, their relatives, or even sometimes their communities. And they are risking their lives with diseases, or they can be beaten up to death, they can be stabbed, or they can fall ill, infected with STIs. That was before HIV and AIDS came. So really all this, and in the end you say, okay, wait a minute, I have to do something. I needed sort of like thank the women from that time to all of them. Because even in the modern day, somewhere, somehow, the sex workers do save people's lives. They do things for people in a positive way, which of course they are not appreciated, but they have a heart. They are women. They are human beings. They do their work because they have to. There's so many crises going on. What do? Children are taken to school. They are fed. In fact, some of the children of the sex workers are prominent people.
Wow.
In politics, in law, in theater, in everywhere. I mean, big dues, doctors and all. These children might not have known how their mothers raised the money to go to school. Most of them might not know, but some later on, I'm still researching, and I still research up to now in that area. And you find out, some found out late when their mothers were gone, and some found out when their mothers were old. And some of the mothers were brave enough to say, look, this is what I did for you to go. Not that they were asking for anything, but they just wanted it. Most of them couldn't do it, or they didn't have the opportunity or whatever. So I still feel I respect sex workers. I really do. They have a heart.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely very powerful. And you have a heart, for a very sensitive heart to the stories that are untold, to the other side of the story and the untold story, especially where people are just being stuck in a stereotype and in a narrative that is in no control of their own. And so when we look at the entire scope of the body of your work, there's a lot of voice and humanizing being given back to many of these so-called misfits of society, or the so-called underbelly of society. And you're kind of saying, wait, let's actually take a deeper look and really get up close and personal and see that this person is just as human as you and I. 4 years later, you then published Destiny.
Yes.
And Destiny really broke the taboo in terms of talking about hermaphrodites. Yes. And Destiny is such an interesting title for me, but in our conversation, you were quite strong in terms of, but they were born that way. Is that why you chose the title Destiny for that particular book?
Yes, I think I played around with all sorts of, but I think I settled for Destiny. And by the way, at that time, the terminology which is used now for that area is LGBTQ. And at that time, no one would accept that one. It was not acceptable. And when you use hermaphrodite, it doesn't sound good. But for the time that it was then, that's how it had to be dealt with. But now, from at certain time to now, it's LGBTQ. Sometimes others put I at the end. Depends on which way. These people are born that way in most cases. We have them in our communities. They are born as children. They have parents. They are grown up. Some are born in hospitals. Some are born in rural areas. Some are born on farms anywhere else. But who cares? Nobody bothers. It's a big secret. But it's painful for the parents. These children, they are growing, and it's themselves. It's so difficult. No one wants to talk about it. We have to.
But definitely, but you are talking about it. And I think that is one of the most powerful callings that a writer has. Powerful insights there for us all to ponder. It's time for a short break, but stay tuned. We'll be right back with advice from Virginia about writing and getting your voice out there. You don't want to miss this. We're back with Virginia Phiri, talking books and the stories behind them right here on the Thando Book Club. We're so glad you're here with us, and we're about to talk about two of Virginia's really well-known texts before we get into the story about publishing. So soon after Destiny, about 4 years later, you then did Highway Queen, and about 9 years later, you then did Grey Angels. These are, again, controversial for some people, but then rich with insights in terms of masculinity, femininity, culture, tradition, and some of the clash between all of those different social institutions. What I found interesting about Highway Queen and what I've learned about Grey Angels was the men in terms of Stephen, Sophie's husband in Highway Queen, and then Professor Jojo, Linda's father in Grey Angels. And to me, they really described or presented a picture of men who have all the trappings of the authority, but none of the substance to anchor it. And their passivity and their opting out of their role or part of their partnership in their families is what drives their families to, the brink of destitution, to the brink of, a real and utter decline. And it's the women forced to make tough choices who are at the center of it all. What is your commentary on masculinity through especially those two stories, and why is it not changing when we consider the time between 2010 and 2019?
Well, I'll be honest with you. Patriarch has come out so strong. I mean, strong and brutal to such an extent that families are really struggling, suffering. They only think of themselves. They are special and nobody else. And this has actually frustrated the women folk who are the wives, the mothers, the grandmothers. They don't care. So, in other words, we need to get to the bottom. Even when this so-called women's movement that has brought about change on laws and rules and everything is written down, is passed laws and everything else, oh no, they do not care. They carry on to do what they want to do because this macho selfishness, whatnot, we need to get there and expose and show, and people understand. Even their own children will read about it because my books can be read by anyone else. They are understood. You were talking of the academia having gone for them. There's something there. We need, I feel it's my responsibility. And if you've realized, I don't change books every year. They take years. You need to research. You need to check. You need to check and check again to make sure it's authentic. And what I'm saying, I've got nothing against men. I'm born of man as well. got a father, we've got brothers, we've got uncles, we've got everything. They're all out there, even my own relatives, they understand. I have to write what I write. Of course, some of them are not happy. And, you know, Virginia's got a big mouth, Virginia talks too much, Virginia does this. That's moi. And I will always do that. Somebody has to intervene. And also, the economic situation. It is patriarch who holds the key to the economies that the women have no access. Even if they work, how much do they get? Even if they sell this, where does it all go? It disappears into expenses. Lack of responsibility. I'm not bashing patriarch, but they can hear it, and that's how it is. In fact, it's across the board. It's not only about economics. We're talking of politics, we're talking of economics, we're talking of education, we're talking of culture. They're even interfering with traditions. Excuse me. Africa was a matriarchal continent. What has it become? Nobody listens to women. We go to other communities in Africa and see how matriarch still does things right, even if they're in the background, but they have a say. Here now, the women are terrified, afraid.
Definitely. I mean, you've given us so much to ponder on there. And definitely it is your responsibility to write. And I'm so glad you did take the choice and chose to even pursue it at even the expense of self-publishing. But before we come to the close of this segment, we always like to ask our authors to do a reading from one of their books, something we believe women need to hear right now. And so we'd like you to read from one of your books and give a charge to those very matriarchs that you are talking about, and kind of give us a little bit of what to get back to some of those traditions you've just been talking about.
Anyway, if you'd excuse me, it's not much. I'll just read something very small.
Yes, ma'am.
But it will have an impact.
Yes.
And it will actually justify what I'm saying. I'll just read from Grey Angels, and this is from Linda Giorgio. I just found myself doing the unthinkable, well aware of the consequences. Patriarch put so much pressure on daughters in the name of culture, to an extent of degrading them. From there onwards, I think I put it to your imagination.
Definitely.
That's what I was talking about.
And definitely Grey Angels is definitely a book with a lot to offer in terms of imagination. And I encourage you all to read it. I myself will be taking a read as we complete this season. Well, it's been another great edition of the Book Club with our guest, Virginia. See you again next week, same time, with another fabulous African female author. Until then, stay safe, stay strong, and stay true. Goodbye.